After my father left, the house felt emptier than ever. His absence was a gaping wound, a constant reminder of how far our family had fallen. My mother tried to keep things together, pretending as if nothing had changed. She would go about her routines with a brittle smile, her movements mechanical and detached. I could see the pain etched into her face, the dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. But I was too angry to care. To me, she was just as much to blame as my father. They had both failed me, abandoning me to navigate the wreckage of our family on my own. School became a place where I could pretend things were still normal. I buried myself in assignments and exams, channeling all my pain and frustration into something productive. But even that couldn't fill the void left by my parents' crumbling relationship. Emily tried to be supportive, but I could tell she was growing frustrated with me. I had become distant and irritable, lashing out at her over the smallest things. More than once, she asked if I wanted to talk, her voice gentle and patient. But I always shut her down, unwilling to let anyone see how much I was hurting. Instead, I kept running. Every morning, I would push myself harder, faster, as if I could somehow outrun the pain. It became an obsession, a ritual I clung to when everything else felt out of control. But no matter how far I ran, the emptiness always followed me. Weeks turned into months, and my father's absence became the new normal. He would call occasionally, his voice strained and formal, like he was speaking to a stranger. I would mumble short answers, refusing to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much his absence had hurt me. My mother continued to spiral, her attempts at maintaining normalcy growing more desperate and forced. She would plan family dinners, only to sit alone at the table, her eyes fixed on the empty chair where my father once sat. The sadness in her gaze was suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. In my mind, she had given up on us just as much as he had. They had both chosen their own pain over their family, leaving me to pick up the pieces alone. I resented them for their weakness, for their failure to protect what we once had. It was around this time that I started skipping school. Not often at first, just a day here and there when everything felt too overwhelming. I would wander the city, losing myself in the crowds and the noise, anything to drown out the thoughts that plagued me. But the more I skipped, the easier it became. It was like slipping into a dark, comforting void where nothing mattered and no one could hurt me. I stopped answering Emily's texts, stopped caring about my grades, stopped pretending that everything was okay. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside my father's new apartment. I had stumbled upon the address by accident, overhearing my mother mention it during a strained phone call. The building was dull and lifeless, a far cry from the warmth of our old home. I stood there for what felt like hours, torn between anger and longing. Part of me wanted to march inside and demand answers, to force him to acknowledge the pain he had caused. But another part of me was too afraid of what I might find. What if he had moved on? What if he had already built a new life that didn't include me? In the end, I turned away, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't even begin to process. I had always believed that family was something unbreakable, something that could withstand any storm. But now, standing alone in the cold, I realized just how fragile it all really was. The loneliness was unbearable, but so was the anger. I had been betrayed by the people I trusted most, abandoned and left to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. As I walked away from my father's apartment, I couldn't help but wonder if anything would ever feel whole again. After that night, nothing was the same. It was as if my parents had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They spoke less and less, their words clipped and cautious, like strangers attempting polite conversation. The air in the house grew stale, thickened by the resentment neither of them could hide. I spent more time avoiding home than being in it. School became my sanctuary, a place where the fractured pieces of my family life couldn't follow. I threw myself into my studies, volunteering for every club and extracurricular activity I could find, anything to keep me away from the cold silence waiting at home. My friends began to notice the change in me. They would ask why I looked so tired, why I didn't laugh as much, why I seemed so distracted. I brushed off their concerns, hiding behind excuses about schoolwork and teenage angst. But deep down, I was terrified. Terrified of what was happening to my parents. Terrified of what it meant for all of us. It's strange how quickly a home can become just a house. Walls that once felt welcoming now seemed to close in around me, suffocating and unfamiliar. My mother stopped baking. The kitchen, once filled with the comforting scent of fresh bread and cookies, now remained unused and sterile. My father retreated into his work, spending long hours at the office or locked away in his study. I tried talking to them separately, hoping to uncover some explanation for their unraveling. My mother would only smile weakly and assure me that everything was fine, her eyes distant and glazed over. My father would nod, his words clipped and formal, as if rehearsed. I knew better than to press them. Their patience had grown thin, and I was afraid of pushing them further apart. It was during one of those long, lonely evenings that I found myself sifting through old photo albums. The glossy pages were filled with smiling faces, captured moments of happiness and unity. Birthdays, vacations, holidays, all now seemed like remnants of a distant dream. I found myself clinging to those memories, desperate to believe that the love I remembered hadn't been a lie. But as days turned into weeks, it became increasingly clear that whatever bond my parents once shared was unraveling faster than I could comprehend. They rarely spoke to each other, and when they did, it was with a strained politeness that felt worse than outright anger. One night, I heard my mother crying. Her sobs were muffled, but their rawness cut through the quiet like shattered glass. I wanted to comfort her, to ask what was wrong, but fear kept me rooted to my bed. I was terrified that acknowledging her pain would make it more real. Instead, I lay there, paralyzed by my own helplessness. I was a child standing at the edge of a crumbling cliff, watching everything I had ever known fall away beneath me. The days that followed were a blur of avoidance and pretense. I became adept at hiding my own pain, plastering a smile on my face whenever someone asked if I was okay. But inside, I was drowning in the confusion, the anger, the sorrow. It was around this time that I started spending more time at my friend Emily's house. Her family was everything mine had once been: warm, welcoming, full of laughter. I envied her in a way I had never felt before. Sitting at their dinner table, surrounded by easy conversation and genuine affection, felt like stepping into a world I had only dreamed of. But no matter how hard I tried to lose myself in the comfort of someone else's home, the weight of my own broken family remained. It followed me like a shadow, clinging to my every thought and seeping into my dreams. I found myself growing angrier with each passing day. Angry at my parents for letting things fall apart. Angry at myself for being too powerless to stop it. That anger built up inside me, simmering just beneath the surface until it threatened to consume me whole. And then, one evening, it all came pouring out. The evening my anger erupted started like so many others. I came home late, slipping through the front door with the hope of avoiding the tense, heavy silence that had become our norm. My parents were in the living room, their voices low and guarded. I couldn't make out their words, but the strain was evident. I went straight to my room, tossing my bag onto the bed and collapsing onto the mattress. My hands trembled with a restlessness I couldn't shake. It felt as if my chest was caving in, the weight of everything I'd been holding inside pressing down until I could barely breathe. It happened so quickly, I barely had time to process it. One moment I was lying there, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, and the next I was up, storming down the hallway and into the living room. My parents turned to me, startled by my sudden presence. I don't even remember what I said. The words tumbled out of me in a rush of frustration and hurt. I accused them of neglecting me, of pretending everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. I demanded answers, explanations, anything that would make sense of the chaos they had created. They just stared at me, their eyes wide and uncomprehending. I could see the guilt and pain etched into their faces, but that only fueled my rage. I had spent so long bottling everything up, trying to maintain some semblance of peace, and now it was all spilling out unstoppable and raw. My mother started to cry, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. My father remained silent, his expression rigid and unreadable. It was the first time I had truly let them see how much their conflict was tearing me apart. I left the room before they could respond. My chest heaved with sobs I refused to let them hear. I ran to my room, slamming the door behind me and collapsing onto the bed. For a long time, I just lay there, my face pressed into the pillow, tears soaking through the fabric. The aftermath of that outburst was a blur. My parents tried to talk to me, to explain themselves, but their words felt empty and rehearsed. Apologies without substance, promises without conviction. I shut them out, refusing to engage in conversations that seemed designed only to placate me. In the days that followed, I withdrew even further. I avoided my parents whenever possible, spending my time either at school or at Emily's house. I told her bits and pieces of what was happening, but never the full truth. It felt too personal, too shameful to share. I began to resent my parents not just for their conflict, but for dragging me into it. They had shattered the illusion of a perfect family, leaving me to pick up the pieces on my own. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to put them back together. The worst part was the uncertainty, not knowing what was going to happen or if things would ever return to the way they once were. I had lost faith in them, in the love they had once promised would always be there. One night, I overheard them talking about separation. The word hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and disoriented. I hadn't wanted to believe it could come to that. I had clung to the hope that somehow, some way, they would find a way to fix what was broken. But the truth was undeniable. Their love had fractured beyond repair, and no amount of wishing or hoping could change that. I lay awake that night, staring at the darkness and wondering what it all meant. If they couldn't make it work, what did that say about everything they had taught me? About family, about love, about the things that were supposed to last forever? For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. The days that followed were some of the loneliest of my life. My parents continued to drift further apart, their interactions reduced to brief, strained exchanges that only deepened the chasm between them. I moved through our house like a ghost, avoiding them whenever possible, desperate to escape the tension that had taken over our once happy home. I threw myself even harder into school, taking on extra projects and volunteering for tasks nobody else wanted. Anything to keep me away from the suffocating silence that had settled over our family. Even Emily noticed the shift in me. She asked if I was okay, her eyes full of concern, but I brushed her off with the same shallow excuses I'd been giving everyone else. I convinced myself that I didn't need my parents, that I was strong enough to get through this on my own. But no matter how hard I tried to bury the pain, it clung to me like a shadow, always there, always reminding me of everything I had lost. At night, I would lie awake for hours, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. What had gone wrong? Was it something I had done? Had I missed the signs, ignored the warning bells because I wanted so desperately to believe that we were still a family? The guilt and confusion gnawed at me, leaving me restless and exhausted. It was around this time that I started running. At first, it was just a way to burn off the anger and frustration building up inside me. I would lace up my sneakers and sprint through the neighborhood until my lungs burned and my legs trembled. The physical pain was a welcome distraction from the emotional turmoil I couldn't escape. But as the weeks went by, running became something more than just an outlet. It became a ritual, a way to regain some semblance of control over a life that felt increasingly out of my grasp. The steady rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement, the cool air against my skin. It grounded me, gave me something solid to hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping away. I started waking up before dawn just to be alone with my thoughts. The world was quiet at that hour, bathed in the soft glow of early morning light. I would run until my muscles ached, until my breath came in ragged gasps, until the pain of the effort drowned out everything else. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't outrun the truth. My parents were talking about divorce. They tried to shield me from their discussions, keeping their voices low and their conversations private. But I wasn't stupid. I could read the tension in their expressions, the way they avoided each other's eyes, the careful politeness that had replaced genuine affection. I kept waiting for them to to sit me down and explain what was happening. But they never did. They left me to piece it together on my own, to grapple with the reality of our crumbling family without any guidance or reassurance. The anger I had felt before returned with a vengeance. How could they be so selfish? How could they tear our family apart and expect me to just accept it? The injustice of it all consumed me, leaving me bitter and resentful. I started lashing out, not just at my parents, but at everyone around me. Emily grew frustrated with my mood swings and unexplained absences. Teachers commented on my declining grades and distracted demeanor. But I didn't care. Nothing seemed to matter anymore. One evening, I came home to find my father packing a suitcase. The sight of him calmly folding his clothes, his expression blank and resigned, sent a shock of cold terror through me. I asked him where he was going, but his answer was just as empty as his expression. Just staying somewhere else for a while. Things were complicated, he said. It was best for everyone if he left for a bit. I felt something break inside me, a deep, aching void that swallowed everything I thought I knew about love and family. He left that night without so much as a goodbye. Just a quiet, awkward hug that felt more like an obligation than an act of comfort. As I lay awake that night, the darkness pressing in around me, I realized that I was more alone than ever. After my father left, the house felt emptier than ever. His absence was a gaping wound, a constant reminder of how far our family had fallen. My mother tried to keep things together, pretending as if nothing had changed. She would go about her routines with a brittle smile, her movements mechanical and detached. I could see the pain etched into her face, the dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. But I was too angry to care. To me, she was just as much to blame as my father. They had both failed me, abandoning me to navigate the wreckage of our family on my own. School became a place where I could pretend things were still normal. I buried myself in assignments and exams, channeling all my pain and frustration into something productive. But even that couldn't fill the void left by my parents' crumbling relationship. Emily tried to be supportive, but I could tell she was growing frustrated with me. I had become distant and irritable, lashing out at her over the smallest things. More than once, she asked if I wanted to talk, her voice gentle and patient. But I always shut her down, unwilling to let anyone see how much I was hurting. Instead, I kept running. Every morning, I would push myself harder, faster, as if I could somehow outrun the pain. It became an obsession, a ritual I clung to when everything else felt out of control. But no matter how far I ran, the emptiness always followed me. Weeks turned into months, and my father's absence became the new normal. He would call occasionally, his voice strained and formal, like he was speaking to a stranger. I would mumble short answers, refusing to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much his absence had hurt me. My mother continued to spiral, her attempts at maintaining normalcy growing more desperate and forced. She would plan family dinners, only to sit alone at the table, her eyes fixed on the empty chair where my father once sat. The sadness in her gaze was suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. In my mind, she had given up on us just as much as he had. They had both chosen their own pain over their family, leaving me to pick up the pieces alone. I resented them for their weakness, for their failure to protect what we once had. It was around this time that I started skipping school. Not often at first, just a day here and there when everything felt too overwhelming. I would wander the city, losing myself in the crowds and the noise, anything to drown out the thoughts that plagued me. But the more I skipped, the easier it became. It was like slipping into a dark, comforting void where nothing mattered and no one could hurt me. I stopped answering Emily's texts, stopped caring about my grades, stopped pretending that everything was okay. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside my father's new apartment. I had stumbled upon the address by accident, overhearing my mother mention it during a strained phone call. The building was dull and lifeless, a far cry from the warmth of our old home. I stood there for what felt like hours, torn between anger and longing. Part of me wanted to march inside and demand answers, to force him to acknowledge the pain he had caused. But another part of me was too afraid of what I might find. What if he had moved on? What if he had already built a new life that didn't include me? In the end, I turned away, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't even begin to process. I had always believed that family was something unbreakable, something that could withstand any storm. But now, standing alone in the cold, I realized just how fragile it all really was. The loneliness was unbearable, but so was the anger. I had been betrayed by the people I trusted most, abandoned and left to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. As I walked away from my father's apartment, I couldn't help but wonder if anything would ever feel whole again. The more time passed, the more I found myself drifting further from the life I once knew. School became an afterthought, a distant obligation I no longer cared to fulfill. I spent my days wandering the city, lost in my own thoughts, disconnected from everything and everyone. The world around me felt dull and colorless, a monotonous blur that held no meaning. My mother tried to reach out to me, her attempts growing increasingly desperate as my behavior spiraled out of control. She would leave notes on my pillow, cook my favorite meals, even try to initiate awkward conversations about my future. But I ignored her efforts, refusing to engage in anything that resembled normalcy. To me, normal no longer existed. The life I had known was gone, shattered beyond repair. And no amount of false cheer or forced conversations could change that. Emily eventually stopped trying to reach me. Couldn't blame her. I had pushed her away so many times, shutting her out with cold indifference and careless words. Our friendship had been one of the few constants in my life, but even that wasn't enough to pull me from the darkness I had fallen into. I started spending more time alone, retreating into the safety of isolation. The loneliness was crushing, but at least it was familiar. It was easier to numb myself to the pain than to confront the reality of everything I had lost. My father's absence continued to haunt me. His occasional phone calls had grown even rarer, and when they did come, they were brief and awkward, filled with empty platitudes and shallow attempts at connection. I couldn't bring myself to forgive him for leaving, for abandoning me when I needed him most. I had stopped running. The ritual that had once brought me comfort now felt meaningless, a hollow echo of something that no longer held any value. Instead, I would lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling and letting my thoughts consume me. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I overheard my mother on the phone. Her voice was low and strained, thick with exhaustion and worry. She was talking to someone about me, her words filled with concern and desperation. She mentioned my grades, my absences from school, my increasing isolation. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of guilt. My mother was struggling just as much as I was, fighting to hold on to what little remained of our family. But instead of helping her, I had only pushed her further away. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been so consumed by my own pain that I had failed to see hers. She had lost just as much as I had, her marriage, her sense of stability, her relationship with her own child. I wanted to reach out to her, to apologize for everything I had done. But the words felt trapped in my throat, tangled up in years of resentment and misunderstanding. I had spent so long building walls around myself that I didn't know how to tear them down. Still, the guilt lingered, gnawing at me like a persistent ache. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The next morning, I made a decision. I would try to rebuild something from the ruins of our broken family. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be perfect. But it was better than continuing down the path I had been on. I started by going back to school. It was difficult, facing the teachers and classmates who had watched me unravel over the past few months. But I forced myself to push through the discomfort, determined to find some semblance of stability. My mother was surprised by my sudden change in behavior. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the relief in her eyes, the hope she had been too afraid to express. It was a fragile, tentative thing, but it was enough to keep me moving forward. I wasn't ready to forgive my parents, not yet. The wounds were still too fresh, the pain too raw. But I was willing to try to take the first steps towards something resembling healing. It was a start, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act. I was still angry, still hurt, but I tried to push those feelings aside long enough to rebuild some semblance of normalcy. Returning to school was the first step, but it was far from easy. My grades were in shambles, and the teachers who once praised my dedication now regarded me with wary concern. I spent countless afternoons in the library, catching up on missed assignments and cramming for tests I had long since given up on. It was exhausting, both mentally and physically, but the effort gave me something to focus on. A purpose, however small, to cling to. My mother noticed the change. She tried not to push me, giving me space while still offering gentle encouragement. Her attempts to reconnect were awkward and stilted, but I could see the sincerity in her eyes. She was trying just as I was, and that was enough to keep me moving forward. Emily and I eventually reconciled, though our friendship would never be quite the same. Too much had changed, too much had been left unsaid. But she forgave me for shutting her out, for letting my pain consume me to the point where I had pushed her away. Slowly, we began to rebuild what had been broken. The hardest part was trying to reconnect with my father. His absence still loomed over me like a shadow, a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong. He would call occasionally, his voice distant and hesitant, as if he was unsure whether I even wanted to hear from him. At first, I ignored his attempts to reach out. I was still too angry, too hurt by his abandonment to offer him anything resembling forgiveness. But eventually, I realized that clinging to my anger was only hurting me. It was a weight I carried everywhere, dragging me down and keeping me from moving forward. So, one evening, I picked up the phone and called him. The conversation was stilted and awkward, our words fumbling over one another like strangers meeting for the first time. But he sounded relieved to hear from me, his voice thick with emotions he couldn't quite hide. We talked for a while, skirting around the things that truly mattered. It was a shallow, superficial exchange, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. As the weeks went by, I continued to rebuild. My grades slowly improved, my friendships began to mend, and my mother and I found a fragile sort of peace. It wasn't perfect, and there were still days when the weight of everything felt unbearable. But I was learning to push through the pain, to find moments of joy amid the darkness. My mother and I began to have real conversations. Not the strained, polite exchanges we had grown accustomed to, but genuine discussions about what had happened, about how we had both been hurting. She admitted her own mistakes, her own failings, and I admitted mine. It was a painful process, but it was also healing. Through it all, I continued to struggle with my relationship with my father. His absence still haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he had abandoned me when I needed him most. But I was trying little by little to forgive him. One weekend, he invited me to spend the day with him. I agreed, though the thought of seeing him brought a mix of dread and longing. When I arrived at his apartment, he greeted me with a nervous smile, his eyes filled with hope and uncertainty. We spent the afternoon talking, sharing stories and memories in an attempt to bridge the gap that had grown between us. It was awkward and painful at times, but there were moments of genuine connection, moments where I could almost believe that things might one day be okay again. He apologized for leaving, his voice breaking as he admitted his own guilt and regret. It was the first time I had heard him speak so openly, so vulnerably. His words didn't erase the pain he had caused, but they were a step toward healing. I left his apartment that evening feeling lighter, as if a weight I had been carrying for months had finally begun to lift. There was still so much left to work through, so many wounds that had yet to heal. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't ready to forgive him completely, but I was willing to try. Rebuilding my life felt like trying to piece together a shattered vase. Every fragment was jagged, imperfect, and no matter how carefully I tried to fit them back together, there were always gaps, sharp edges that refused to smooth. But with time, the pieces began to form something resembling a whole. My mother and I settled into a new rhythm. The tension between us eased as we both made the effort to communicate honestly. She admitted that she had been trying so hard to hold everything together that she hadn't seen how deeply her own pain had affected me. And I admitted that I had been so consumed by my anger that I couldn't see her pain at all. Our conversations became more natural, less burdened by the weight of all the things we had left unsaid. There were still moments of awkwardness, times when our old habits threatened to resurface. But we were both trying, and that made all the difference. My relationship with my father remained strained, but it was slowly improving. I agreed to spend time with him on weekends, usually just for a few hours at a time. We would go for walks or grab lunch at the small diner near his apartment. It was uncomfortable at first, both of us struggling to fill the silence with idle chatter. But gradually, the conversations became easier, less forced. He continued to apologize for leaving, his regret evident in every word he spoke. I could see the effort he was making, his determination to rebuild our relationship even when I wasn't always willing to meet him halfway. His persistence was both frustrating and comforting. There were days when I couldn't bring myself to forgive him, when the memory of his departure still felt like an open wound. But there were also days when I could see the man he was trying to become, the father he was struggling to be for me. And those days gave me hope. Emily and I rebuilt our friendship slowly. I apologized for the way I had treated her, for shutting her out when all she wanted to do was help. She forgave me without hesitation, her kindness something I hadn't realized I had taken for granted. We spent afternoons together like we used to, laughing over nothing and sharing secrets as if no time had passed. Our friendship would never be quite the same, but it was stronger now, forged through hardship and forgiveness. School remained a challenge, but I was making progress. My grades improved, my focus sharpened. I found solace in the structure, the sense of accomplishment that came from meeting goals and overcoming obstacles. It was something concrete, something I could control. Running became part of my life again, but this time it wasn't about escape. It was about finding balance, a way to clear my mind and reconnect with myself. The steady rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement brought me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The wounds from my parents' separation were still there, still raw in places. But I was learning to live with them, to accept that healing was a process that couldn't be rushed. I was beginning to understand that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or pretending the pain didn't exist. It was about acknowledging that pain and choosing to move forward anyway. There were moments when I caught glimpses of my old life, flashes of the happiness we had once shared. But I no longer clung to those memories with the same desperation. I had come to realize that holding on to the past only kept me from embracing the present. One evening, as my mother and I sat together on the couch, I told her about my most recent visit with my father. She listened without judgment, her eyes soft with understanding. It was the first time I had spoken openly about my efforts to rebuild my relationship with him. She admitted that she still struggled with her own pain, her own feelings of betrayal. But she encouraged me to keep trying, to keep reaching out even when it felt impossible. Her support meant more to me than I could express. The road ahead was still uncertain. There were days when the weight of everything threatened to drag me down, when the anger and sadness resurfaced with a vengeance. But I was learning to face those moments instead of running from them. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was moving forward. And even though the journey was far from over, I was finally beginning to believe that healing was possible. The months that followed felt like a slow awakening. As the fog of anger and grief gradually lifted, I began to notice the small moments of beauty scattered throughout my days. The warmth of the sun on my face during early morning runs, the quiet joy of sharing a laugh with Emily, the soft reassurance of my mother's smile when she saw me making an effort to rebuild my life. My father and I continued our cautious attempts at reconciliation. Our meetings were still awkward at times, but they were also genuine. We spoke more openly now, our conversations occasionally dipping into deeper waters instead of skimming the surface. He would tell me about his own struggles, his regrets and hopes for the future, and I would listen, not always with acceptance, but with a willingness to understand. Forgiveness was a gradual process, one that required patience and persistence. There were days when the anger resurfaced, raw and untamed, but I was learning to let it pass, to acknowledge the pain without letting it consume me. School became less of a burden and more of a refuge. I found myself investing in my studies not out of a desire to escape, but out of a genuine interest in rebuilding something meaningful. The satisfaction of overcoming challenges, of pushing myself to do better, became its own reward. Emily remained by my side through it all. Our friendship had weathered the storm, growing stronger in the aftermath. She was my anchor, the one person who had seen me at my worst and still chose to stay. I couldn't express how much that meant to me. My mother and I continued to rebuild our relationship, one conversation at a time. We were both learning to be honest with each other, to share our fears and hopes without the fear of judgment. It wasn't always easy, but the effort was worth it. One evening, as we sat together in the kitchen, she told me that she was considering therapy. The admission surprised me, but also filled me with a sense of relief. She explained that she needed to work through her own pain, to understand her own role in everything that had happened. Her willingness to seek help inspired me, and for the first time, I felt a genuine sense of hope for her healing. I still struggled with my relationship with my father. There were times when his presence felt like a reminder of everything that had been lost. But I was trying, and so was he. The effort mattered even when the progress was slow. One Saturday, he invited me to spend the day with him. We went hiking along a familiar trail, one we had walked together countless times before everything fell apart. The air was crisp and cool, the leaves turning vibrant shades of orange and red. Felt like stepping into a memory, but also like creating something new. We talked as we walked, our words flowing more freely than they had in months. He asked me about school, about my friends, about the things that made me happy. And for once, I found myself answering honestly. As we reached the top of the trail, we stood together in silence, looking out over the sprawling landscape below. The world felt vast and beautiful, a reminder that life continued to move forward even when everything felt broken. My father turned to me then, his expression earnest and raw. He told me that he was proud of me, proud of the effort I was making, proud of the strength I had shown in the face of everything we had been through. His words struck something deep within me, a place I had buried beneath layers of hurt and resentment. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, letting his words sink in, letting myself feel something other than anger and sadness. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be okay again. The walk back down the trail was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, one that didn't feel weighed down by all the things we hadn't said. I could feel something shifting between us, a tentative trust beginning to form. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about everything that had led me to this point. The pain, the anger, the struggle to rebuild. It had been a long and difficult journey, one filled with setbacks and uncertainty. But for the first time, I felt like I was truly moving forward. I wasn't fully healed, and neither was my family. But we were trying, and that was enough. The final steps of healing were the hardest. By then, I had come to accept that the life I once knew was gone, replaced by something messier and far less certain. But within that mess, there were moments of clarity, glimpses of a future that no longer felt weighed down by the past. My mother continued with therapy, her progress slow but steady. She grew more open with me, sharing the insights she gained and acknowledging the mistakes she had made. It was strange, seeing her so vulnerable, but it was also comforting. It reminded me that healing was a journey, not a destination. My father and I found our own rhythm, a fragile balance built on mutual effort and forgiveness. We would meet up every weekend, our conversations gradually shifting from the pain of the past to the possibilities of the future. He never pretended that everything was perfect, but his sincerity gave me something to hold on to. One afternoon, he brought me to a small art gallery tucked away in a quiet part of the city. It was his way of sharing something he loved with me, of inviting me into a part of his life I had never known. We walked through the exhibits together, our conversation flowing easily as we admired the paintings and sculptures on display. I found myself smiling, genuinely enjoying his company in a way I hadn't thought possible. The anger and resentment I had carried for so long had begun to fade, replaced by something gentler and more forgiving. I was learning to see him not just as my father, but as a person who had made mistakes and was trying to make things right. Emily remained a constant presence in my life, her friendship a steadying force that helped me find my way back to myself. We spent countless hours talking, laughing, sharing our hopes and fears. She had been there for me even when I hadn't deserved it. Her patience and kindness a gift I would never take for granted. School became something I could enjoy again, rather than just a means of escape. My grades continued to improve, and I even found myself excited about the future. The dreams I had once pushed aside were slowly coming back into focus, their edges sharper and more vivid than before. My mother and I rebuilt our relationship piece by piece, learning to trust each other in new ways. We still had our disagreements, our moments of frustration, but those moments no longer felt like insurmountable obstacles. They were just part of the process, part of the effort we were both making to move forward. It wasn't until months later that I realized how far I had come. One evening, as I sat with my mother in the kitchen, I found myself telling her about a future I had once been too afraid to even consider. We talked about college, about the things I wanted to study, the places I wanted to see. Her eyes shone with pride, her encouragement warm and genuine. My father remained a work in progress. There were still moments of tension between us, unresolved issues that lingered beneath the surface. But he continued to show up, continued to try. And that effort, more than anything, was what allowed me to keep forgiving him. Looking back, I could see how much had changed. The anger and grief that had once consumed me had softened, replaced by acceptance and resilience. My family would never be perfect, but it didn't need to be. We were learning to rebuild, to find joy in the imperfections and strength in the effort itself. The pain hadn't disappeared completely. It still flared up at times, like a wound that had yet to fully heal. But I had learned to face it, to acknowledge it without letting it control me. I had learned to forgive not just my parents, but myself. I no longer felt weighed down by the past. Instead, I felt free to move forward, to embrace whatever the future might hold. And for the first time in a long while, that future felt bright. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to leave a comment and share your thoughts. It will help the channel grow and inspire me to create more interesting stories for you. I also want to apologize for any mistakes in the text, as the narration is done using artificial intelligence. If you notice any inaccuracies or areas that need improvement, please mention them in the comments. This will help make the content even better. Thank you for watching and for your support.